Hello, everyone. GM. How's it
GM.
going? We have a very special guest today, PP Man, joining us. Alok would like to do the introductions for today.
Yes, absolutely. Today we are with PP Man. So meet PP Man. He's the head of product at Yuga, ex TradFi suit turned full-time crypto degen. When he's not shipping products that push the ecosystem, he's deep in the trenches of Web3. He's known for his metas, and he picks things up faster than most, and always know where the alpha is. He joined the club early by winning his vape in a giveaway, and then joined straight into Yuga right after. And he's been an absolute value to the ecosystem since. And today's his birthday. So happy birthday, PP Man.
Bro called me a suit.
Congrats.
That's insane. Love it. That's actually true, by the way. The ape thing, I bought an NFT. It was a wrapped NFT for, let's call it $200. I forget, maybe less. And like a week later, I have an ape in my wallet. I was like, "What's this?" I'll be honest. I was like, at the time it was like $5,000 or whatever. I was like, free $5,000. I just looked at it as the money, but just got embedded in the community so hard that I don't know if I would have had bought that rat NFT, I don't know what I would be doing right now.
So just like for context, PP Man is at Yuga, and Ape Foundation and Yuga, we work really closely, and we're all here to push the ape ecosystem forward. And today we'll just cover some basics of what's PMF, what's like essentially product market fit, and PP Man will cover what are metas in Web3. So like without any delay, unless Matheus, you have something, we can get started.
Well, just thank you very much, PP, for joining us and highlighting how important this is in the recurring part of the bootcamp, because we are straight ahead in the part of building a prototype right now and going from prototype to MVP. And this camp is different from most of the other hackathons because our objective is not just about building tech. Actually, we want to build projects that are going to have users, that are going to have revenue, that are going to go out to the market, maybe even raise capital or start bootstrapping. So different from just building any product, we want to build products that have product market fit, that solves a real pain in the market. And this in Web3, especially inside the ApeChain community, can be done with some metas. So for some proven paths that have been there in the market, that haven't been battle tested. And if we follow these methods, the chance of success are higher than trying to build something entirely new or entirely undiscovered or something that we tested in the past that didn't work as well. So having this kind of discussion right now, it's very important, because before spending too much time on building a prototype or a project on a product on something that people don't want to consume, now we can explore those metas, explore what we can build inside the ApeChain community, and maximize the chances of those projects having actual revenue.
Amazing. Yeah. So that's interesting. You mentioned that the current stage of the workshop is going from prototype and into MVP, right?
Yes. Exactly. Just started that. We finished ideation. Last homework was great. Almost 40 submissions, great ideas, great projects. And now people are trying to build the prototypes. We are vibe coding the whole thing, so the iteration process should be very quick. And now they are trying to get those prototypes in front of their own audience. Now, what would you say for these people, PP? How to actually target, find the PMF and validate?
Yeah, for sure. I think before going into like actual PMF, one of the very important things that builders need to have that mindset is they need to really understand who they're building for. By the way, are you guys there? Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just giving you a highlight. But if you want to, we can keep.
Amazing. I like to see your faces. Now, what I was saying is, it's super important to understand who you're building for. I think that one of the hardest parts that I see builders, try to overcome, and when they do it, it's when they actually, find a good fit for their audiences, is basically stripping out their ego and willing to sacrifice. The best example that I have in mind right now is just how, we all or for those who went to business school, how Sears used to be basically the Amazon of its time, back in the 90s, early 2000s. I'm not that old, by the way, but if you study, Sears at the time, it employed something like, I forget, it's like probably like 400,000 people. It had thousands of physical locations. And sure, you could argue that they failed because they missed this big box format boom. But what they really failed to do is they failed to cater to the specific user that we're trying to target. They were trying to be everything for everyone. You could be buying a thong or, like whatever apparel, and just across the hall, you could buy like kitchen appliances. It just did not make sense. So I think one of the most important things is you need to be willing to sacrifice, and most importantly, define who you're building for. And I think this is where people get confused. If you think of like, let's say that this prototype is, I actually don't know what the prototype is, but let's just say it's predictions market, because that seems to be hot right now. So let's say you've done some research and you want to build a predictions market, and let's say that your edge will be, it'll be the simplest prediction market, because you believe that every single prediction market is doing it wrong, and it's quite complex and scares people. So you're like, all right, I want to build for the masses. I'm going to build for normies. And you go and you try to target this normie market, but at the end of the day, you still haven't defined your audience. Like, I'll give you an example. Is my 92-year-old grandmother a normie? Sure. But are you targeting her for this predictions market? No. Therefore, you still haven't defined, that target audience. I think the way to actually define this, or at least the way that helps me the most, is to actually build a persona and be as specific as you can. Like, try to narrow it down even to a single person. Like, you need to understand what the age of that person is, what the gender, where they're at, like the geographic location, what their income is, what they do for work, like the profession, where they hang out, both like in real life as well as digitally, like the social media apps that they use, their interest, habits. I think you get the point. And maybe we could do that little exercise. Like, let's say that you're like, all right, my prediction market needs crypto rails because it opens the world of possibility. It becomes transparent. Yet I want to target, we said normies, which we're yet to define. And maybe the way that you actually define this person is, and I'm going to make this up, but like, this needs to be like a data-driven approach. You can't just like make it up on the go. But, let's just say that it's a 22-year-old recent grad, and your research shows that he lives in New York City. Let's just put a name to him so that we can refer to him. Let's just call him Gerald or whatever. He lives in New York City. He graduated a couple years ago from a state university. He currently has a corporate job in Midtown Manhattan, but he lives outside Manhattan, let's say in Queens, because he can't afford Manhattan. He has a middle class upbringing, maybe earning something like $100,000, which may seem like good money, but in New York City, it doesn't get you through, or at least is just enough to get you by. He's obsessed with, fantasy football, spends his nights scrolling on TikTok, and thinks Facebook is lame. Obviously, that was a very, on the run type of persona. But now that you've defined Gerald, and that you know that he's in New York City, and you know that he spends the nights, scrolling through TikTok, whenever you build, like whenever you are actively introducing new features, analyzing the onboarding experience, fetching the data from your platform to improve, the way that you got to think is not what you as a builder think is cool, what Gerald would think is cool, like what would suit his needs. And in fact, getting this across the team so that everyone knows that they may have a great idea with just an insanely cool feature that could be fun for them. Maybe Gerald could not could not care for that feature. So I think while we did this very on the go, it needs to be, there has to be like some data behind this and there's some actual research behind this, and some time spent like actually understanding how Gerald in this case thinks. Now, when you start building, is you want to avoid that serious mistake of building for everyone, and you need to sacrifice what is cool to you, to your peers, to the rest of crypto Twitter, or whoever you think the cool audience is, because you want to build for this one very specific persona. Now, the reality is that this persona shouldn't be broad enough to encompass, a category of a measurable category or segment of a demographic that you want to target. You don't want to be too niche, but it just helps you build, a very targeted approach to, in this case, a predictions market. By the way, what's the protocol or the prototype that you guys have been thinking? Like, what's the theoretical product?
There are several.
Very cool.
What are the top themes that you detected so far?
I wanted to actually talk about. I wanted to take this conversation a bit later, but in fact, now that we're on the subject, I wanted to talk about a couple of products in Web3 that have found adoption, have found stickiness, and essentially what they did right. Were they the first ones? Why actually they took off? We can cover things like DEXs, prediction markets, lending protocols, things like hyperliquid for trading, things like that. What actually made it so that it got mainstream adoption on its own?
Yeah, Alec, what was the question again?
Yeah, I was saying that if we could just talk about a couple of products in Web3 that have found traction on their own, what they did right, were they the first ones, did they iterate, essentially how did they find stickiness?
Yeah, for sure. I think that broadly speaking, there's three types of products that have been quite successful in Web3. And in all cases, I think it solves a use case for very specific audiences. The first one is stablecoins. I think that we can go into how stablecoins sustainability depends on the net interest rate margin, the difference between what T-bills are paying and what you're paying your depositors. And I get that, but at the same time, it really solves a need. And perhaps people living in the US don't see it, but if you take a look, for example, at the biggest used or regions of transactions with stablecoins, it's all in emerging markets. Argentina is one of the biggest markets that uses stablecoins. In fact, Tron, which I don't think, or maybe you guys do, I don't know, but when you think of crypto or on-chain activity, you don't think of Tron when you're I'll be honest, I don't even have a Tron wallet. But Tron is one of the most used blockchains or at least most of the activity comes from emerging markets, specifically, again, Argentina. And it's solving that need for being able to transact freely without the intervention of, in that case, potential government, intervention. I think I'm not going to get political here, but Argentina, you could argue that it's on a good path, a bad path, but historically, it's been in paths in which, there's restrictions to their monetary, or at least their currency. Beyond that, the ability for you to freely spend, whatever it is that you want to do without clunky middlemen, which if I were to send you, Alec, let's call it, larger amounts, I'm just going to say a number like $20,000, it would take me a couple of days. So it's solving real needs, and I think that's going to be a main theme going forward. Obviously, whenever there's something successful, there's many iterations, and in fact, what we're seeing right now, even though there's clear domination, may not be the end state of what stablecoins look like. The second one, I think, perps, and we could call it. We could say that rather than perps, what has found product market fit is gambling and skip speculation, being very real with the way that things have evolved. Everything from the meme coin boom that kind of started like 2 years ago, but it really exploded earlier this year, and pretty much died. But that's all, the product is gambling and speculation. And the real need for having liquidity be able for you to be, going in and out without being worried about whether you're going to have an impact when you exit out. It has been quite powerful. Again, sure, Hyperliquid has been probably the most dominant case, but whenever there's product market fit, you see a bunch of things coming up, specifically Aster, of course, which is the hottest thing. Lighter is another one. And yeah, prediction markets. I think with prediction markets, would make, I don't think it has, it's definitely found a product market fit, but, or at least like you'd say that it has crossed the chasm. But at the end of the day, I think prediction markets is I'll take a step back to say this. Whenever you define a category, in the long run, that category becomes multiple categories. What I mean by that is predictions market at the end of the day, it's still a subset of a gambling market. If you think of whether it's something as broad as a casino or as targeted as sports betting, prediction market fulfills the same need, just for very event-driven, or I guess in real life event-driven use cases, which I think it's great. I think that not only it feeds the user need for betting on an outcome, but it also brings, let's call it, the truth out of people. I think that the biggest thing that, or the best thing that has come out of prediction market is being able to actually see what people think with their money, which is, in my opinion, the strongest source of truth. If I tell you the sky is green, I could be very loud about it, but I'm not going to put money behind it. Therefore, you could observe, like it's an observable market that I'm basically lying because the sky is not green. So yeah, I think those are the three main things. I mean, we can go into like many others that have very strong or stable sources of revenue. We can talk about like, I call it boring DeFi, but it's probably going to offend people. But I'm talking about DEXs, simple lending protocols, not things as complex like. But yeah, I think those are the three main things that are currently strong in the market.
Cool. So going back to your conversation about like, let's talk about your ideal customer persona, ICP. Because like Uniswap was not the first DEX, Polymarket was not the first, what's it called, prediction market, and the same thing with Hyperliquid was not the first ever perp DEX, right? They did something that actually elevated themselves from the competition, or I mean, they stood out from the rest in some way. So they found some niche that they capitalized on. Let's talk about a bit of that niche. What did they actually do differently? What others tried? And I'm not saying like they failed, but essentially like they found that magic sauce that separates themselves from the other products within their let's say competition, and then stood them apart from the rest.
Yeah, I'll say this, and you're totally right. They were not the first, but as a builder, even if you're not the first, so I'm going to take a step back. I mentioned that in the long term, a category becomes multiple categories. I mentioned the casino, bigger category that has now subsets like sports betting. I think you guys get the point. When it comes to being the first, you're right. These protocols and these platforms were not the first, but they found, and as a builder, you need to find your first. I'll give you an example with BAYC. Was BAYC the first PFP? No, it wasn't. In fact, it's not even the second, not even the third. It's not even probably the 100th. I'm sure there was just a bunch of spam, collections just popping everywhere. But it was the first PFP collection that revolutionized digital ownership through its IP. It gave away the IP to, or not gave away, but it redirected the IP rights to its users. So what I'm trying to say here is you need to find your first as a builder. Similar to how Uniswap, sure, we can talk about technical innovations, but they also made the user experience extremely simple. They were the first very simple to use decentralized exchange. And even up to now, the standard way of interacting with a decentralized exchange is the Uniswap way. It's a very clean, simple user experience that you enter which currency you want to get rid of and which currency you want to acquire, and you click a button. And sure, I know that SushiSwap, for example, is a direct fork, but when you're, by the way, no shit to SushiSwap, I know the guys over there and they're great people, but when you are aiming to be the second in a category, your strategy will always be determined by the leader. So if you build, for example, a Uniswap competitor right now, and you're like, I'm just going to do exactly what Uniswap does because they make money, and I will take a little chunk of it. And even if I get, let's call it a 10th or 10%, or I'm sorry, 20% or whatever it is, I'm going to make money and I'm happy with that. You're basically allowing your strategy to be dictated by Uniswap, which is not the way to build, if you want to innovate. Oh, look, I actually forgot what the question was, but I just wanted to really emphasize that, yes, you don't need to be the first one in the broader category, but you still need to find your first thing.
Absolutely. Thank you for covering that. I think we've gone over the major hurdles of as a builder, where do you get started? How do you actually before even talking to your first customer, you got to think of who your product targets, what pain points are you going after? And then we could talk about a bit about the whole, essentially the thought process of a builder going from, hey, I have this idea, it affects me. Maybe there are other people who have the same issue as me. And then you start building on it, get some validation from your first set of users. If it doesn't solve their issue, you take a step back, iterate, go forward. If your first 10 users are happy, then you start looking at, okay, how do I actually scale this? You talk about growth. So the early steps, right? As a builder in your first, if you feel that you actually have a great idea, how do you actually go about from that moment to actually validating this with your first set of user, friends, family, whatever?
Yeah. So let's just set the stage on where you are in the process. Let's say that you've defined your target audience, you understand what your product is going to be, and you also understand the core edge or differentiator of your product. Therefore, you've got a broad idea of what your features are, and you're building it. The most important thing is, once you've actually said Gerard is my target user, you actually need to go out and find Gerard. You would need to go out and talk to Gerard, ask him, for feedback, and most importantly, if it allows, have them have a say or weight on what you're building. I'll give you an example. Even though I think when we think about ApeCoin, for example, just ApeCoin as a whole, at the end of the day, ApeCoin is the product, or is a product. We can argue that. Let's just assume that I'm correct here, and the ApeCoin is a product. We're going through something called Project Raid, in which we're basically expanding ApeCoin's audience, ApeCoin's presence, and we want ApeCoin to be, everywhere or anywhere where the hot iron is, and usable in any way that people want to use them. The reality is that we could have done this in a very blind manner and just think what we think is cool and what we as part of the team use and go with those things. But the reality is that we actually seeked help from the biggest ApeCoin holders, as well as from smaller players, to understand what they're interested in. We, at the end of the day, we could have had 50 different partnerships, but we kept it very tight so that people that currently hold ApeCoin could use their ApeCoin in the exact manner that they wanted to, which means that others would also follow suit with whatever usage. I'll give you an example. We just launched on Hyperliquid or HyperVM. One of the biggest asks was you gotta be in Project X. Cool, that's the first thing we did. Project X is there, and it's been great. People are using it. So I guess to your question about what is it that you need to do, it's very important for you to find your target audience. And you can do this in things as personalized as DMs or as broad as surveys. There's a lot of data and a lot of services that you can use so that you can actually get how your user persona is thinking. But yeah, if you build blindly, I think you may end up in a position where you think you're building for Gerard when you're actually building for yourself.
Amazing. Actually, yeah, that's great. A slight follow-up to the last part, which is what you just mentioned, that like you want to talk to Gerard, you want to talk to more people like Gerard. So now you're going into the territory of research, let's say. You want to find your customers, you want to find your audience. In Web3, what would you recommend would be like as a builder? Where do you go around, like, find your first users? Because I feel that like Web3 has this echo chamber of Twitter, let's say.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like, think of like big platforms, Roblox. Roblox has 90 million daily active users. And think of the biggest blockchains, Solana, which I love Solana, right? But it has a couple million daily active wallets. And the reality is that users are probably even less because, these are wallets, not users. Anyway, to my point is, it really depends who you're building for. If you're building for crypto Twitter, in my opinion, the two biggest things that you should be doing is, number one, Dune. I think that with the help of AI, specifically ChatGPT, you can basically do anything in Dune. You don't need a data scientist. I mean, props to all the data scientists out there. But you don't need a data scientist to get going and at least understand the basics of what or who you're trying to build, and cross-check that with specific users on Twitter. I think that Twitter has a lot of noise, and even though I think the InfoFi, sector has helped marketing teams get out there that otherwise perhaps wouldn't have had much mind share, it also creates a lot of noise. So broadly speaking, crypto Twitter is something to pay attention to. Just be very wary of, that sentiment could be perhaps corrupted by incentives. That's why, yes, crypto Twitter is a great place, but individualized, feedback is probably much more important than, trying to follow what the sentiment is on a given day that could potentially be corrupted by a bunch of incentives. It's a long gonna read. It's doing analytics. If you don't know how to build queries, ChatGPT can build it for you. And if you're building on Web3 specifically, individualized groups on Twitter, not as a whole.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so next bit, I would go a little bit further. From right now, we're looking at a microscopic level from your like exact search and exact market data, etc. Let's take a step back and talk about metas, because like you've been ahead of the curve for 4 years time in Web3. Let's talk about what drives meta. How do you identify metas, and how do you capitalize on different metas? And essentially, like, we could talk about like some of the like popular metas, starting even like all the way from like DeFi, Summer. Like we can actually go back. I mean, we can go as further back as you want.
Dude, by the way, that's why I love Hyper EVM right now, because like it reminds me of DeFi Summer. It's just like that very, yeah. Anyway, yeah. I mean, if you take a look, for example, at Yuga as a whole, Yuga, whenever it has, let's call them bigger activations, it's always been in the meta. Like, sure, it wasn't the first PFP project. Like, it was their first. I mentioned it, but it was the first project that gave true IP rights and changed digital ownership. Same with the other side. Sure, it's not decentralized and Sandbox, who were there and are still there. But if you take a look at how other side is taking shape, it's, in my opinion, the best metaverse out there. You can go with smaller things, like even recently, like even though it wasn't completely launched by us, we had a lot of influence and talked to the guys from TokenWorks, and the Ape Store, Ape Strategy was launched. which is this project that uses attacks to buy Bored Apes and eventually resell this, creating a deflationary mechanic for the token. But at the end of the day, I think that if you're building, for a crypto audience, lining up your product with whatever the meta is will probably get you the most eyes. But again, you got to find what's your first. You can't just be like, I want to build a perps, platform because that's what's hot. It's like, sure, but what is the thing that you're attempting to solve for? The last thing I'll say about that is you don't have to fulfill every single meta. If you do that, crypto is a very attention-based, industry. And at the end of the day, when you talk about even token prices, they're all attention-based. Sure, you can create flywheels that sustain mechanics in the background at times, but at the end of the day, attention will always lead price, which will always lead narrative. And you don't have to be at the forefront of every single meta, but you do have to be thinking about when you do activations, when you launch it, when you release features, how does it relate to whatever people are talking about so that you can get the most eyes and therefore attention.
Sweet. Let's, I'm just thinking next could be, okay, this is a little bit like subjective, but I find that you have half of Web3 saying that like NFTs have had their run, they're actually like, they're never coming back. And then you actually have like users and I mean like on the side of NFTs who are actually like doubling down on NFTs essentially, right? Like, and I don't mean just like PFPs, I mean like the whole NFT space, IP rights, things like that. So what sort of meta do you actually see that like is inevitable, I would say, in NFTs, IP, or I mean like, okay, inevitable maybe would be a strong word, but essentially what sort of metas do you see you would be able to identify using IP rights?
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer that with two ways, and these are like very personal opinions. So if you don't agree with them, don't blame Apecoin or Yuga. But at the end of the day, I think that. So I'm going to answer it first in terms of like the existing assets being like current collections, and a little bit forward looking in terms of like what I think needs to happen for NFTs to proliferate across like whatever we're doing. But specifically on current collections, if you think about where things are moving with crypto is becoming much more mainstream. I think that regulatory environment is much more clear. I think that companies are exploring, it's not that I think, it's companies are actually exploring ways to incorporate blockchain technology into whatever it is that they're doing, most notably, banks. And at the end of the day, when you hold an asset such as BAYC, and this is, again, very personal, but I hold it mostly for kind of like a status symbol, if you think about it. It's very recognizable. It creates that brand, and I guess in a way, it validates what you're trying to do or say. And when you have all these companies being led by, I guess, very serious people, unlike crypto Twitter does, you have a market in which potentially these become the next thing that people will want to acquire for others to pay attention to them when it comes to crypto. I'll give you an example, and this is not going to happen because he's very anti-crypto, but Jamie Dimon, he talks, do we listen? No. Now, if he wore a Bored Ape and he talked, we would fucking listen. Like, we'd be like, all right, this guy knows what he's talking about because he's wearing a Bored Ape, and which means that he's into and understands the culture. And so being able to join an industry with immediate status, and I'm not talking about economical status symbols such as wearing a very fancy watch. I'm talking about a status symbol with a reputational status symbol. That's what I'm trying to get to. If somebody comes into an industry that they're not known yet, they want to fully understand and integrate and immerse themselves, they can buy their way into that reputational status symbol by holding one of these, NFTs. So that's, in my opinion, the way that PFPs are going to move. We can talk about the digital art market, which is a whole different story. But focusing a little bit more on like going forward, I think that the use cases for NFTs have not been brought to its potential. I think that we still think of NFTs as speculative assets. And I was talking to Steve Barkin in like a few hours ago, and one of the things that he mentioned that I fully agree with is at some point NFT as a technology will be referred to as perhaps what the means of it, what it's trying to achieve. I'll give you an example. If you are in a stadium and are about to go into like whatever game, a Yankees game, a New York Yankees game, you never say to the ticket guy, hey, let me pull out my QR code. Don't say that. You say, let me pull out my ticket. But the QR code is the technology behind it. Similar to that example, I think that NFTs will be called by whatever means they're trying to achieve rather than by the technical term.
All right. Before we move on to the Q&A, I think Matheus, do you have anything for PP?
Well, I gotta say that I built a lot of projects for myself in the past because I thought that there would be good ideas. And when I went to market, I discovered, they were good ideas for me, but people think differently, right? So I did like 5-6 times, and the results were exactly that: 0 users. I've been saying that for a while. So vibe coding is not only about tech; it's much more about going out to the market. So I'm learning so much from your wisdom, PP. Thank you very much for coming today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
PP, do you have anything else do you want to conclude with, or we can move to the Q&A?
Happy to go into the Q&A, and if anything comes up, I'll definitely mention.
Sweet. The top question that I see right now is, I have an amazing idea that I feel the hard part with it is sharing, because I feel someone can make it faster. So how can I go about getting feedback on something like this?
Yeah, so I guess the question is, somebody can build my idea faster, so is it worth it, right? I see the question now. Yeah, so when you build, at the end of the day, if you build something that's commoditized, not only will somebody be able to build it faster, they could potentially build it better for you, than you. I think that understanding what your edge is and leaning into it, like fully leaning into it, is what will make your product differentiated versus others, which sure, they can build a competitor quickly, but they will never get to market with your specific edge, because that's the one, let's call it trade secret, that you hold. If you're worried about somebody building exactly what you're building, I think it's probably worth taking a step back and fully going and researching the edge that you're trying to solve, that the market hasn't thought about.
Sweet. We can go to the next one by Minty. With so many metas, what approach do you take to marketing on CT? CT is crypto Twitter. I've noticed with Yuga, the information cycle seems like a list of a lot of materials once.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what is it that you're trying to make your users do. I'll give you an example. I forget the prototype you guys were building, but I'm going to stick to my predictions market example. Let's just say that you're building I guess it's already been built, but like an elections feature. And you want to go all in on the political side of prediction markets, because you think that you have connections with large media that could use, the information from your market, and you can make deals with them, whatever it is. If you do that right now, that's clearly not going to work. It's not election season. It's not political season. And if you release that feature along with a bunch of stuff like the blitz that we've been doing, for example, with or the approach that we're doing with RAID, for your specific use case of, I guess, this political prediction markets that we now created, it wouldn't work. You need to have a very targeted approach so that people understand what's the one thing they need to do. Now, if what you're trying to do is a big broader, which, for example, for Project Raid, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're making sure that people understand that ApeCoin is expanding its audience, its presence, and there's multiple things that you'll be able to do with ApeCoin. Key on the multiple things, that's like the key word. You go out and do a blitz in the style of, announcing, in our case, 30 partners in the last 2 weeks. And sure, does it dilute attention? It does, but it really punches the message about how ApeCoin will be wherever the hot iron is. And then, of course, like you've got, I guess KOLs I don't mean KOLs in the traditional sense of like, crypto KOLs. It's more like people that have a targeted audience. I guess my account could be considered one, which like whenever I can talk to apes, like using these mediums, specifically my account, you could target very specific examples of what people should do with the information released. But broadly speaking, if you're trying to send a big message, I think Blitz is the way. If you're trying to send a message in which people do one thing, a targeted approach is the way. You're on mute, Alok.
Yeah. Could you highlight the next question by Croc? Can you talk about the ways the personas by Yugas have evolved over the 4 years since BAYC launched? I'm specifically curious, how do you think about the broad group of normies?
Yeah. So I think there's two things there, because like you could argue that other side has a few audience segments. It has, let's call it a hardcore of a few thousand, a very hardcore user base of like a few thousand people that are just, including myself, we are like diehard other side users. But the longer term plans have an evolving, and I'm careful with the words I choose here because like Figgy may just end up killing me. But like in the long term, that persona evolves into what you're describing, Sirach, a more normie audience, which again is a very targeted segment of normies. Like I mentioned, that is my 92-year-old, or I think I said 82, whatever, 82-year-old grandmother a normie? Sure. Is she the target audience for other side? No. So an evolving user persona is needed when you're building in public, but you got to have that predefined. You can't just make it on the go. So that's one part on the norming side of the question. On the other hand, if you think about BAYC, as much as BAYC is very driven by pop culture and mainstream eyes, at the end of the day, its hardcore user is still very crypto centric. So that's a bit more of an, let's call it, exclusive club for, I guess, us degenerate people. That wouldn't, like, I wouldn't call that. I wouldn't even mess with that segment trying to introduce normies. We've got BAYC, which is this very exclusive segment of crypto people with other side. It's an evolving platform with an evolving user base.
Great. Next question is a bit more generic by LL Cup King. I'll go back. Yeah. How to make something that caters to all in Web3 but still branded with IP? It's more generic.
So I think even all of Web3 is extremely wide of an audience. The thing, and maybe you have a more defined version of what Web3 is, and if so, I think that's definitely the way to go. But I'll come back to the Sears example, in which I think the target audience for Sears was like mass consumers. It's like, yes, but mass consumers means having thongs in one side of the aisle and a kitchen appliance on the other hand of the aisle. And I'd be careful with that. Just like, Web3 is still a very broad audience. And when it comes with branded IP, if you're talking about like existing branded IP such as BAYC or MAYC, I think the best way is, or I think the easiest way is talking to your core user base, which may very well be, if you define it as so, part of the club, which is very accessible. There's many group chats, and just like I mentioned that you should be talking to Gerard, whether it's through direct interactions in DMs or even like more high-level interactions such as surveys. Same thing here. Being able to like dive into whatever it is that you're building with that group of people that follow that branded IP is going to be key.
Alok, you're muted again. Yeah, good.
Sorry, yeah, I just like mute myself in between. I want full attention on PP.
Wonderful,
If something is loved and well received in Web 2, do you think creating a Web 3 version of it is a smart idea?
1,000% if you're solving something new. If you're solving something that can't be solved with Web 2 Rails and you're adding Web 3 Rails, 1,000%. I'll give you the simplest example that I have in my mind right now. Dollars, physical dollars, or just digital dollars in the sense of credit cards and stuff, or I guess bank transfers. That's a Web 2 product. Stable coins, I mentioned that it's one of the biggest things that have found product market fit. That's just dollars. Like stable coins are dollars, that's it. But with Web3 Rails, that solves the problem of eliminating censorship, eliminating middlemen, and it's a great, way of bringing something that was Web 2 into the Web3 version. So to answer your question, 1,000%, as long as there's a very specific need that can be solved with crypto Rails.
Awesome. Our next question is Minty's. You guys, writers, storytellers at the helm, has storytelling given way to a more degenerate approach to education?
Wait, I don't understand that question. Has storytelling given way to a more degenerate approach to education? Minty Fresh, DM me the question because I did not get it. But I'll tell you like a little bit about the approach. If you're talking about like educational, or I guess degenerate educational content, and this is a bit more. I guess I'm gonna. Minty Fresh, DM me the question because I definitely want to answer like what's in your mind. I think I'm going to answer a different way. But if you think about ApeCoin, for example, we've got Project Raid, which I think most of us NFT people have been quite simple in the way we use our fungible tokens. Now we're entering into things that are a little bit more outside of realm, specifically things like DeFi. The storytelling and the educational content that we're pushing around this has been in the simplest form, or as simple as possible that we can make it. I'll give you a very specific example. I could go into how you could potentially use your ApeCoin to borrow, buy PT tokens from Pendle, collateralize them on Aave, borrow stables to loop that whole thing. I'm going to get people lost if I push that out. People will be like, that's too complicated for me. So we go towards the much more simple way of being something like, and this is a real example, by the way, which I've got a tweet. It's easy to find. Use your ApeCoin, borrow USDC, deposit in Hyperbeat. That's it. And what you're doing there is, sure, you're getting a 10% yield on your stables, but you're collecting points from 8 different protocols that could potentially turn into a TGE. Therefore, you're making ApeCoin work for you. It's giving you moonshots that you could potentially benefit, with the outsized rewards from the airdrops. Minty Fresh, I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Yeah. Alok and I've been following Minty's project, and he's very packed with storytelling, like for teaching the tech on the uses of the hand of the users. I guess he's going that direction. Maybe he should DM you and exchange some ideas on that, right?
Also, just so you know, it's like 7 a.m. my time, so it's definitely on me. It's my mind just like being very slow right now.
grab some coffee. Thank you for joining this early.
Yeah.
Did you have a couple more questions?
Yeah, we just take like these the last last two questions here, and I've got like one on my own actually. Let me go with quickly like inject my question because I would otherwise lose track. Web3 gaming, right? Like
Yeah.
we had the narrative that the Web3 gaming is going to revolutionize. It had all the ingredients. You would actually had the audience gaming. Everybody loves gaming. There was the like let's say the aspect of you would actually own your assets. They would be interoperable. I mean, they would be able to own them entirely, and then it. Whereas like, and even the industry, right? Like Web2 gaming is like multi-billion-dollar industry. Web3 gaming had some momentum first, and then it started to like lose that slowly. A part of that goes down to the narrative as well, that like it's play to earn and all of that. But like even outside of that, why do you think like is the reason that Web3 gaming, I mean, like, okay, like, of course, like, not to dissect it entirely, but like, what do you think went wrong with Web3 gaming going off, like, moonshotting?
Yeah. So it's not so much what's wrong with Web3 with gaming. It's, I think, what's wrong with the audience it's targeting as well. When you think of a lot of the Web3 gaming projects that have been pushed, it targets a very crypto-driven persona. And let's be very real with ourselves. Like, crypto Twitter wants to make money. Like, it's many of us, including myself, are there for the tech. Absolutely, the most are there for the speculation. And speculation is very attention-driven. And when you try to target and catch that attention wave that comes to you and could be very successful for a few weeks, even months, it'll eventually go away. And if you've created a flywheel dependent on attention, it makes it very hard. So there's many approaches to, I wouldn't say fix this, but there's many approaches to like have successful Web3 rails on gaming. I'll give you an example. And this is a very specific example that we're working on. But if you think of Roblox has 90 million daily active users, of which about 15 million are developers, like basically world creators. It's 15 million monthly active users, but whatever. Now, these people are actively creating content, games, and taking advantage of Roblox distribution. But on the other hand, for them to actually get distributed is extremely hard because it's extremely censored. There's a 40% basically rake on the affiliate / experience owner, which becomes prohibitive, which then that's from Roblox. And then you tack on another 30% from if you're using a mobile platform such as Apple's store. And it just becomes something that you still do it because it's the only way to go. But if there was a platform, I guess I'm showing my own things here, but such as other side in which you've got no decay that soon will be open to anybody, and you've got a distribution channel that you can go through without that restrictive Web2 tax. Now you've got creators much more inspired to build without being heavily penalized by, I guess, all these intermediaries. And all of it possible with crypto. At the end of the day, it's very permissionless the way that you can build, whether it's in-game assets, skins, worlds, experiences, social, whatever it is, given the permissionless nature of it, and elimination of these middlemen, it could potentially pave a way of like excitement around creators. Now, are people still making money? 100%. We all wake up and have eggs for breakfast, and somehow we got to pay for those eggs. Like, yes, people are still making money, but it's not in the speculative way of, oh, my character is now worth $40,000 or $60,000 because it's a one in-game asset rather than my whole digital identity, etc., which it's all bound for attention, which could cripple down.
Sweet. Next question, actually, I think is for Matheus. Can I take an API from other LLM and use it in my apps?
Yeah, I wanted to wrap this question more like people mentioned about stable coins, how it's a normal thing, like dollars. I've been there since like gold coins and recurrentialism and all, and now upgraded to those papers that we believe that they worth something, but we believe, right? So the same way some things can happen on the AI field of bringing those LLM APIs that are all there, use $1 billion valuations for these companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, and all. Can we port them inside Web3 and use narratives, using NFTs, using smart contracts and all, and bake them in an app in a way that Web3 Rails would make it something extra, something else, in your opinion? There are a lot of people saying yes, there are a lot of people saying no, that this is not a valid use case. I would love to hear from you.
By the way, Matheus, are you Brazilian?
Yes.
Eu falo português.
Oh, muito bom.
I'm from Mexico. I speak Spanish, but a little bit of Portuguese. Anyway,
Nice.
100%. I think that so the very interesting thing about AI is that there's a lot of corners that lead to dead ends when you're building. What I mean by that is there's a lot of eyes on it. There's a lot of builders on it, but it's still not, the infrastructure is still not fully developed. I'll give you a very basic example. Most of the AI stuff is, or at least on the agent side, is built on Python. Yet you've got these smart contracts that are, or at least like these blockchains that have virtual machines that, sure, you can interact with them, but they're not directly, fed with Python. So if we had, for example, a Python virtual machine, it would make things much more easier for agents to just like run around and execute and, I guess, evolve in a way. So yes, I still think that there's a lot of potential for AI to be incorporated in whatever it is that we're building. I also think that as things or as infrastructure gets developed, that opportunity for AI to be incorporated is going to grow just insanely bigger, like exponentially bigger.
No, that's wonderful. So yeah, this can be a great idea.
We have 1 minute left. We'll just cover one last question from Croc. Any creative ways you guys using AI to supercharge the things we're talking about here? AI hacks that could potentially use to help us move our projects forward.
1,000%. And there's a tweet that I'm going to retweet from my account, so stay tuned. I just need to find it. There's a tweet that I think Figgy posted, if not, it was Garga, in which it shows how you can use a prompt-based, and by the way, this is very early. I certainly don't want to promise, but how you can use a prompt-based mechanism to build your experience in other site. All prompt-based, natural language, no code needed. So yeah, to answer your question very bluntly, yes, you guys taking full advantage of possibilities around AI for natural language prompts.
I thought you would say the nano bananas. With Coco, ape bananas. Well, that's a good one.
So we're just on the clock. I would say thank you, PP Man, and thank you, Matheus, for this session. It was like incredible. I think like everyone loved it. Of course, I think like it's if you're an early builder, I think like this session would have helped them. Also, like the Q&As, like we have, I mean, send a question if you have in the builder chat. And as again, like, thank you again, PP Man, for the insight into the industry, into the metas, and essentially like how to actually get started on your builder journey. So thank you so much.
Amazing. The last thing I'll say is that I think that I put a lot of structure to the way of, the thought process of building a product. What's, in my opinion, what's even more important is to stay scrappy. If you become over processed and just create this, huge process to even get to the idea, I think you're doomed. Staying scrappy and iterating fast is way more important than a lot of what I said.
Wonderful. That was a great session. Thank you, Alec, for bringing PP. Thank you, PP, for coming that early. I look forward for all of your projects, all the prototypes. Now you should be testing that with people. Find your PMF. We're going to send a homework form through a blast, and see you next week.
Amazing. Thanks so much, guys.
get into the bonds of it. Thank you, PP.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Good one.